We will then switch gear and move into the research culture talk, which will be presented to us today by Ntando Yola. Ntando is a community engagement lead at the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation in Cape Town, an organization that has strong links with a research center called the Desmond Tutu HIV Center in our institute. He has years of experience working in the field of HIV research and related aspects, where he advocates for and mobilizes research and its related aspects in community engagement and effective participation in the processes of research. His work includes developing and implementing community engagement strategies and advisory mechanisms, as well as partnerships with key stakeholders aimed at advancing HIV in clinical trials. Seeing communities empowered to take ownership of the efforts that seek to achieve AIDS epidemic control, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, is what energizes Ntando and his amazing work. He believes that communities have much to offer and the mechanisms to do so, and that these mechanisms should be prioritized when designing, discovering, and delivering processes and interventions for HIV and AIDS. He has been a fellow of the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, where he has advocated for an in-country framework and a national strategy for broad stakeholder engagement in HIV and TB clinical trials within South Africa. Through the work of his fellowship, he co-founded an organization called Advocates for HIV Prevention in Africa, which works with and defends community interests in research through to public health policy and impact. As our research culture speaker, Ntando will be presenting today on deliberative engagement for inclusive science. What could be more appropriate in these COVID times?
Thank you very much. And it was very lovely hearing from Ambrose. And I liked in particular the reference to the beauty and the beast. And I think part of my presentation is going to be referring to use that same line of the beauty and the beast in the context of science. And the beast in this case, I think, will be communities. The work that I'm going to be sharing today is work that is happening through the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation, which is a research center within the Faculty of Health Sciences of the University of Cape Town and the Institute of Infectious Diseases and Molecular Medicine. And our works is focused on bridging academic research with community development programs, as well as collaborate with the most affected population groups to find innovative solutions in preventing and treating HIV, as well as the related infections. And in fact, as part of this, really highlight the message here that the communities do make the difference. And as it has been shared, whilst our work is on a number of health issues, HIV remains one prevalent disease in South Africa. And with the general population being at around 20%. And we also know that there are about 2,000 new infections weekly that happening in this country. And that makes HIV to be one of the public health priorities amongst the priorities that the country has prioritized. And some of this is really based on the national strategic plan that the country has. And the other diagram there shows the cycle that is continuing from population to population and also driven by a number of social and structural issues. Here, I would like to just take us back to the history when the world knew of HIV, which was in the early 80s. And as part of that, when a lot of communities that were affected saw families, friends, and neighbors really being affected grossly by HIV. whilst there were a lot of efforts that went out to really address the issue, there was a feeling amongst communities that there is not as much urgency. And it is at that time where they demanded that, we should be part of these processes of ensuring that we play a part, we are informed, and in fact, we are also engaged in these processes. And this is one of the things that we have seen later in South Africa around the same agenda of HIV. And at this time, early in 2000, we had a government that really was not embracing science as part of the solution of this, or at least science as the solutions were presented at that point. And that is why we had a lot of activism that really started in South Africa to really confront government, to really recognize the important role that science has to play with the breakthroughs that it has to address the issue of HIV in the country. And that has led to a lot, later in years, and in fact today, where we are regarded as one of the countries that has the most antiretroviral treatment program in the country. And actually this did not provide people with an opportunity to live normal lives and actually have longer time to live, but it also provided another innovation, because when people who are HIV infected take treatment and take it religiously, we get they are not able to transmit the virus to their sexual partners, and this resulted in this campaign known as U equals U, which means undetectable. Because of treatment, the virus is undetectable, therefore you cannot transmit the virus. In fact, ARVs also were taken further to interventions that we have today, where we have pre-exposure prophylaxis, where again science proved and tells us that if you take an ARV, you are at risk of HIV, and you take a PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, you will not contract HIV. And in fact, the future is promising a whole lot of other options, which is the choice that we need in the country. But now, all of these interventions that science is providing, and for them to function effectively, it is important to note that the public, who are the sole beneficiaries of these interventions, if they perceive science as not socially beneficial, the science will cease to make the impact that it seeks to make. And in fact, as a result of that, we have a popular slogan amongst communities that there should be nothing, even science, that happens without us. Therefore, without involving communities in research endeavors, their viability is very much threatened. And therefore, that takes me to some of the things that I'm going to share with regards to community engagement, where we involve communities in science. And that is how partly how community engagement is defined, which is a collaborative endeavor with community groups to address the issues that impact the communities and their well-being. And it has got a lot of principles and processes that are involved to really ensure that the communities and science benefits out of these engagements, because it promotes inclusive participation, it supports mutual respect and ethical research. There are a number of national, regional, and global guiding frameworks on how this process should happen. And these are shared amongst all a number of research communities where research is happening. And I've taken one of these guiding documents, which is known as Good Participatory Practice Guidelines in Biomedical HIV Prevention Research. And this one highlights a range of important stakeholders that really play a role and in fact can influence one way or the other how research is happening, especially if it is for communities. It breaks down community stakeholders that are important at a community level, where we have trial participants who really give their lives to participate in research. But in addition to that, even though participants are very key in this process, it is important, and through community engagement, we recognize that they are part of a community, and therefore as part of their volunteering in research, they have to come with their communities, with their families, with their peers, with their friends, and many other community structures. And it is therefore important that community engagement recognizes that, and the approaches are very much informed by that understanding. In fact, the practice of community engagement is really gaining a lot of academic evaluation, where we really look into the effects and as well as the benefits of all of this work. Here are some of the key processes that I'd really like to highlight in these processes. Is that when we do research in community, we go into formative research activities where we really get to understand the community, in fact, interact with the communities, really explore their values and their interests. And as part of that, we go into stakeholder advisory mechanisms where we bring the communities on board and form partnerships, as part of the work. And within that context, we are able to develop plans for engaging the communities, educating the communities, as well as opening lines of communications with science and the communities. And within that, we have a very consultative process between communities and science, where a number of issues and a number of benefits come through. And some of those benefits is where the issues that come up as part of science are managed. And here are some of the activities that are really targeting different groups, where we really interact with the community, understand the issues, the social issues that the communities are faced with, so that we integrate the work of the organization and the work of research with in the context of those issues. Here we are working with young people, and again providing a lot of opportunities that in disadvantaged communities we really get to be very responsive and partner on a number and a range of issues. And all of this work, when it happens, it really brings the research conduct in context, where we get to understand a whole range of other issues that communities are faced with, and a number of developmental issues. And in fact, if we understand these issues, we tailor-make research and the needs for the communities, so that they are able to fit this context, instead of expecting science in communities to fit in the agenda of science. Here are some of what I call collateral benefits of community engagement, is that it really places science at the center of the issues and the challenges that communities face. And in so doing, removes barriers between communities and science, and there's a lot of trust that develops in that process. It builds socio-cultural competency for researchers. It contributes to scientific and ethical integrity of research. In fact, communities get to be informed, to be equipped, and they are in a better position to guide research towards the needs that are relevant for their communities. And it provides mechanisms of accountability between research implementers and the communities. And this actually is one of the most important aspects, because science is meant to impact positively, to impact lives and living positively. And when research involves communities, in advance, we get in advanced preparation for successful research outcomes. And these outcomes, in the context of public health research, they translate into the public impact for which actually in the first place it was meant for. And this is the continuum of community engagement. And here is a point I would really like to close with, that community engagement is a pathway to building trust, encouraging participation, but most importantly, promoting the uptake of the findings for which the research was done in the first place. And I will, at this point, thank you and really welcome any questions.
Well, thank you, Ntando. Indeed, public engagement is such a vital component of science, and thank you for talking to us about how you do it. So, you spoke to us about various steps of community engagement. So, which step has been the biggest challenge for you?
I think in fact, one of the first, the very steps that I shared, which is formative research activities, which really is important in community entry and really building, it provides a basis or a foundation for the development of the partnerships for research endeavors. And this really is a step that informs a lot of the work that happens and removes a lot of assumptions in terms of understanding the community. And it is a challenge in a sense because it is there's not so much buy-in in a sense. In fact, it is understood because it's a very good concept, but there often is not a lot of support and funding, most importantly, for such activities, and which really link with social research to understand the community. So that's one of the processes that I think remains a challenge in community engagement.
Understandable. So, well, my next question to you is about the current pandemic. Well, COVID-19 has impacted all of us in so many different ways. So, my question to you is how has this pandemic and the restrictions imposed by the pandemic impacted your efforts?
It has, and one of the things that we had to do in terms of community engagement has been to figure out, and in fact, something that we should have done a long time ago, is to be able to have innovative ways and approaches of engaging communities. And the pandemic has, whilst there was a serious need of engaging communities, but it would not be in the way we are used to, where we meet as communities. Now we had to find ways of engaging communities behind closed doors, but if it's not behind closed doors, to engage communities in very limited, in settings where there should be very limited contact. However, we have had to really move with speed in ensuring, especially in HIV. Some of the outcomes that we've just received in the past month, it is research that has been concluded during the pandemic, and we had perceived it that it will impact negatively the work, but I think within those restrictions, communities, in fact, which I think is one beauty, or maybe should I say the beast of community engagement, because communities really worked with us. We found ways of connecting with them virtually and encouraged them when things reopened in the country to come and participate and continue, in fact, with their research participation.
Well, that was interesting. And so, in general, what are the different steps that you do for community engagement? The non-pandemic times. I'm sure during the pandemic times, you had to innovate and come up with new ways to do this. But in general, when you were allowed to interact with the community without restrictions, what are the different activities?
So the activities, so the formative research, and we're going to a community that has an issue that, that can be benefited by research. The formative research activities really entail a number of activities, which include, mapping out their community to identify who are the decision makers, who are the groups that have influence in the community. Within that, then with that understanding, you then work with them to really partner with a number of those groups so that we can have a community outreach program that introduces research, but is integrated with a lot of other health issues or health programs that are happening in the community. And then within that is followed by a lot of community education activities, a lot of research literacy activities where communities have to understand the research in order for them to buy in and support the research, and in fact support it based on the value that they see for the issues that they are facing. And one of the activities is establishing a platform that is a community advisory platform where a group of communities are selected and in fact are part of the journey on a constant basis, informing the design of the research, informing the design of a number of tools that are used in research, like informed consent processes informed by the communities. And I think one of the most important aspects and activity actually is when research is concluded, it is very much key, and this is one of the things that we really invest in to make sure that the research outcomes are reported back to the communities, because I think that really affirms the trust that communities have in research. And there are many others that I can share, but those are some of the few.
Well, very true. Sharing research results with the community will certainly enforce their faith in science, and well, that's a very important step. Um, well, thank you, Ntando, for the great presentation and for all the important work that you do in bridging the gap between science and community. And I'm going to read out a slogan from one of your slides: "Nothing about us is without us." That's so true. And with that, I think we will have to close the live session. However, we encourage you to continue the discussion. To continue the discussion, please head to the Slack channel that we've set up for you. You should have received an invite in the chat box. Our speakers will join you there to answer your questions and continue the discussion. In the meantime, from all of us here at Life Sciences across the globe, I would like to thank our participants, Val, for introducing the speakers, and Ambrose and Ntando for the great presentation and the lively discussion session. Thanks to the audience for joining us today. Next week, we will be at our sister institute, National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore, and we will hear from Raghu Padnijat, Bhavna Muralidharan, and Venkat Srinivasan. Do join us, and in the meantime, be safe and see you next week.